proud milestone of Vietnam's 45-year journey as a member of the United Nations. On a meaningful occasion, when Vietnam had just completed the role of a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council and was elected as a member of the UN Human Rights Council, the head of the world's largest multilateral organization's view on Vietnam's position in the international arena, bringing the message that Vietnam is a reliable partner, an active member, and has many important contributions to the implementation of UN missions. The profound impressions of the United Nations Secretary General on the country and people of Vietnam.
2022 marks the 45th year of Vietnam's accession to the United Nations. This anniversary is even more significant with the visit of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to Vietnam. And this visit provides an opportunity for Vietnam to engage further in the common efforts of the UN and the international community in promoting multilateralism, tackling global issues, striving together for peace, development cooperation, and social progress. And today we're very lucky to sit down with Secretary General and listen to him sharing more about his view of Vietnam's development, social progress, and contribution to the UN. First of all, thank you so much, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, for spending your time with us.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
You are visiting Vietnam as we commemorate 45 years of Vietnam's membership in the UN. So what are the three things that impress you the most?
Now, first of all, the most amazing thing is that when Vietnam joined the UN, Vietnam was a country that was extremely poor. And today Vietnam is a vibrant economy, and it is a respected country whose voice is very important in the work of the United Nations. So this is a first aspect. Second aspect, Vietnam became an important contributor to peacekeeping operations. And peacekeeping is one of the main brands of the UN, the soldiers of peace. So to have Vietnamese soldiers of peace with their competence, their dedication, their courage is a huge benefit for the UN and for the populations they serve. And third, I think it's also important to say that Vietnam was a country that was able to implement the Millennium Development Goals, which was the UN Global Economic and Social Program a few years ago. And now Vietnam is totally committed to our global blueprint for justice, for equality and for development, that is the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, eradicating poverty, eradicating hunger, improving the quality and the democratic access to education, improving health systems, looking at water resources, the oceans, protection of the oceans, fight against climate change, measures of good governance, rule of law, transparency in the way countries, all these things correspond to a blueprint for development that is today the global program that all states in the world accepted, and that unfortunately is in many countries not being implemented because of the crises, the different crises that we have faced, and that Vietnam was able to overcome and to go on in the direction of moving forward positively for the development, sustainable development goals to be implemented.
So one of the highlights in terms of collaboration between the UN and Vietnam is the engagement of WHO and other UN bodies with the Vietnamese government in COVID-19 response and prevention. So what can you say about the Vietnamese government efforts in terms of managing and controlling COVID-19?
Vietnam, thanks to a very successful vaccination campaign, was able to find the right equilibrium between the protection of the population and the reduction of the number of infections, and simultaneously the capacity to open the economy progressively, and being able to reach in 2022, as far as I know, more than 8% of growth of its economy, which means that there was a very well planned and well implemented policy of dealing with the disease and at the same time dealing with the consequences of the disease within the community. So this is something that I believe is to the credit of the policies that were adopted.
So as you said, the good management of COVID-19 serves as the foundation for the country to reopen again and ready for economic and social development. So can you comment about that?
I mean, if the economy of Vietnam is growing by more than 8%, when people are talking in the world about the risk of a recession, that shows that this economic policy has been extremely successful. And I believe that that is very important, because if the economy is growing, if jobs are being created again, if there is a chance to, with the income generated by the growth of the economy, to improve the health systems, education systems, this is an extremely important benefit for all, in a moment in which, in large parts of the world, we are facing a dramatic situation in which governments have no resources at all to be able to respond to the needs of their populations. And we see poverty increasing, we see hunger increasing, we see lots of dramatic consequences of the COVID, of the inequality in the availability of resources post-COVID, and now the increased prices of food and fertilizers and energy that was exacerbated by the war in Ukraine.
Almost half a century ago, on the 20th of September 1977, the Vietnamese flag was raised at the headquarters of the United Nations to mark the country's admission to the UN.
Khi ở Hội đồng Bảo an Liên Hợp Quốc ấy, thì 11 trên 15 nước là ký tên đồng bảo trợ ủng hộ Việt Nam gia nhập Liên Hợp Quốc. Thế và ra Đại hội đồng Liên Hợp Quốc ấy, thì cũng có tới 106 trên 148 nước là ký tên đồng bảo trợ Việt Nam gia nhập Liên Hợp Quốc. Chắc chắn là vì con số cao như vậy cho nên mọi người thấy không cần phải bỏ phiếu mà đề nghị vỗ tay và mọi người vỗ tay luôn.
Since then, Vietnam has received strong support from the United Nations and its affiliated organizations in solving immediate problems for a country that has emerged from wars. By the late 1980s, the UN accounted for nearly 60% of Vietnam's foreign aid, excluding aid from socialist countries. In addition, the UN's cooperation helped Vietnam eliminate its backward, subsidized economy and successfully implement the đổi mới policy to reform the economy and resolve economic bottlenecks.
Để phá cái thế bằng vây cấm vận, phải đàm phán với Ngân hàng Thế giới, quỹ tiền tệ quốc tế, rồi các câu lạc bộ nợ Paris, London để giải quyết vấn đề nợ vân vân, thì các tổ chức Liên Hợp Quốc đều tìm cách giúp chúng ta. Đồng thời Liên Hợp Quốc theo dõi những bài học kinh nghiệm của đường lối đổi mới của Việt Nam đã thành công tại Việt Nam để mà đưa vào trong các cái rút kinh nghiệm trong các hoạt động của Liên Hợp Quốc.
Over the past 4 decades, Vietnam has always been proactive and responsible in contributing to the UN's peace, security and development goals. Vietnam is a party to the most momentous non-proliferation treaties and agreements. It was also the 10th country to ratify the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Vietnam has been entrusted with many important UN positions and agencies and left its marks in the process. Notably, in its debut, Vietnam excelled in its role as a non-permanent member of the UNSC for the 2008 to 2009 term, contributing to efforts to prevent crisis, maintain peace, promote human rights, and enhance the transparency of the UNSC. On the 1st of January 2014, another important milestone was reached when Vietnam officially became a member of the Human Rights Council for the 2014 to 2016 term. Also that year, Vietnam began another noble mission, participation in UN peacekeeping operations. Meanwhile, in May 2015, the Green One United Nations House was inaugurated in Hanoi, a symbol marking the implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In 2020, Vietnam was re-elected for a second term as a non-permanent member of the UNSC. Then, this year, on the 11th of October, Vietnam was re-elected to the UN Human Rights Council for a second term from 2023 to 2025.
The following 14 states have thus been elected members of the Human Rights Council for the 3-year term of the office beginning of 1st of January 2023, and Vietnam.
Vietnam's Human Development Index in 2021 remains in the top flight, according to a recent report by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. The country has advanced 2 places in the global rankings to 115 out of 191 countries and territories. This ranking shows that Vietnam still performs well in ensuring human rights despite many difficulties due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
We really feel that there's been a commitment of the government of Vietnam to put people at the center of development following these guidance, which is really at the core of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the core principle is leaving no one behind. And so I think this has been very broadly embraced and especially reflected in the importance that the government of Vietnam has taken for the socioeconomic development.
I've been living in Vietnam for I think 7 years now. And the one thing that I've seen time and time again is that their support for the people is universal. No country in the world, including the country I come from, the UK, can say it's ever 100% perfect. We're always developing, always evolving, especially as the understanding of human rights continues to develop over time. And I think that Vietnam's government tends to be very quick to react, very quick to learn, very quick to adopt new policies and to change things for the better, to create an environment that's useful for the people and that helps to kind of stimulate progress and happiness and better quality of life.
The achievements and experience of Vietnam are the basis for many experts to believe that Vietnam, as the member of the Human Rights Council, will continue to make effective and responsible contributions to the promotion of human rights regionally and internationally.
Vietnam has done great things, and like all countries, it has its challenges. It has fought to eviscerate poverty. The world needs a good model. The world needs Vietnam. The world needs Vietnam to live up to the very best of who it already is, according to the values of its own culture.
Right on this occasion, the United Nations Secretary General's official visit to Vietnam sends a powerful message about United Nations recognition of Vietnam's stance and contribution to the world, as well as the partnership between Vietnam and United Nations.
Little more than a generation ago, United Nations staff were in Vietnam delivering food aid to a country ravaged by war, isolated, and on the brink of famine. Today, it is Vietnamese peacekeepers coming to the aid of people in some of the most desperate parts of the world. Thousands of miles from home. That is the journey we celebrate, from conflict to peace, from aid to self-sufficiency, from poverty to development. The Vietnamese economy is one of the fastest growing in the world. Extreme poverty, hunger, disease, child mortality have plummeted. Literacy rates and access to health care, education, electricity, and safe drinking water have all grown along with family incomes. These are remarkable human rights and development achievements. Vietnam achieved and in some cases exceeded most Millennium Development Goals. And despite heavy global headwinds, Vietnam is fully committed to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. What a powerful testament to the resilience and hard work of the Vietnamese people and for policies that place people at the heart of development.
So climate change and solutions to tackle it also remain high on your agenda, and you have called for more leadership and engagement in reducing the dependence on coal and moving towards sustainable energy sources. So how can Vietnam join hands with the UN in this effort?
That is absolutely essential. I mean, the addiction to coal and fossil fuels is the reason why we are having now dramatic increases of temperature in the world. But more than that, we are seeing terrible storms, we are seeing terrible droughts. I came from Pakistan. 1/3 of the Pakistan territory was flooded. Vietnam is also very vulnerable to climate change. I mean, the delta of the Mekong would suffer enormously with the rise of the waters of the ocean and with the lack of water coming from the river. So, I mean, in a situation like this, to have a country like Vietnam, that is a developing country, to say, okay, we want to develop, but we do not want to develop ourselves to the detriment of the world and of the planet. So we want an inclusive and sustainable development, and we want to be carbon neutral in 2050. I think is a fantastic contribution and an excellent example in a moment where we are still losing the war in relation to climate change. Right. Climate change is still running faster than we are, and unfortunately we have not yet found the mechanisms of solidarity in the world necessary to defeat it. And my appeal to the countries that are cooperating with, and the institutions that are cooperating with Vietnam in the Energy Just Transition Partnership, my appeal is for them to strongly invest and mobilize resources and technologies and capacities to help Vietnam achieve this very courageous goal.
So moving forwards, what steps can the UN donors and technical partners take to support Vietnam in its green transition effort?
As I said, resources and technology. I was in the World Bank and the IMF, and one of the things I told the international financial institutions is that they need to do much more in relation to climate, and they need, because the cost of capital is essential, and the cost of capital is higher in developing countries, they need not only to do their operations, but they need to assume the risk of massive mobilization of private finance. How? Being guarantors of loans or being in a coalition of lenders, takers of the first risk. So there is a lot more that the international financial system needs to do in order to be able to support Vietnam, to support Indonesia, to support India, to support many other countries that are today developing countries, but at the same time emerging economies, already with a huge impact in the global economy. And at the same time, the international community needs much more supportive of your efforts in adaptation, building resilience, protecting the country against the impacts already exist from climate change.
At the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, or COP26, Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính demonstrated Vietnam's strong commitment to combating climate change, one of humanity's biggest challenges. Vietnam has pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, joined the pledge to reduce global methane emissions in 2030 and the Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forest and Land Use, and signed up for the Global Call to Clean Power Transition Statement.
Về phần mình, mặc dù là nước đang phát triển, mới chỉ bắt đầu tiến trình công nghiệp hóa trong hơn 3 thập kỷ vừa qua, Việt Nam là một nước có lợi thế về năng lượng tái tạo, sẽ xây dựng và triển khai các biện pháp giảm phát thải khí nhà kính mạnh mẽ bằng nguồn lực của chính mình, cùng với sự hợp tác và hỗ trợ của cộng đồng quốc tế, nhất là các nước đang phát triển, kể cả tài chính và chuyển giao công nghệ, trong đó thực hiện các cơ chế theo thỏa thuận Paris để đạt mức phát thải ròng bằng không vào năm 2050.
Immediately after the conference, Vietnam established the National Steering Committee to implement the commitment to climate change, ensuring synchronous actions to realize the commitments made at COP26.
Since Glasgow, the Prime Minister has set up a committee which he chairs on this issue, and that shows real leadership from the top. And that's what's needed in any government, to push forward an issue, that leadership and that vision from the top of the government, as the Prime Minister is showing.
Regarding investment attraction, Vietnam is an appealing destination for green FDI flows. According to the Ministry of Planning and Investment, from the end of 2021, there has been a shift in the quality of foreign invested projects in line with Vietnam's Green World goals, such as Lego's first carbon neutral plant and Pandora's 100% renewable production facility.
Our factory here in Vietnam will be our sixth factory, which will be a carbon neutral factory, our first carbon neutral factory. And our factory goes into our supply chain and at equal level as our other 5 factories. So we are going to supply the customers in Southeast Asia with all our products made out of Vietnam.
Và chúng tôi cũng đã nhìn nhận thấy là có một cái làn sóng khảo sát đến từ châu Âu sang Việt Nam nó lớn hơn rất là nhiều. Và từ giờ cho đến cuối năm thì nó sẽ có một làn sóng các doanh nghiệp và các nhà đầu tư tiềm năng sang tìm hiểu Việt Nam thêm nữa, đặc biệt là đầu tư vào lĩnh vực xanh và công nghệ xanh.
As one of the countries most affected by climate change, Vietnam has been a pioneer in implementing green commitments, which is strongly acknowledged by the international community. On the eve of COP27, Vietnam will continue to be active in the fight against climate change to achieve the set goals.
So COP27 is about to take place in November, and with the commitment that Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính made during COP26 about the country's commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050, maybe do you think it's a good example to talk about at COP27?
COP27 has many issues to discuss, but there are 3 issues that I consider essential to reestablish the trust between developed and developing countries. First, to make sure that loss and damage is finally taken into account seriously and that we move in relation to loss and damage. And the loss and the damage is there. I was in Pakistan, I saw it. And so we need to have mechanisms that allow to address this problem and to assume the responsibilities corresponding to the problem that exists. Second, a much stronger bet on adaptation. Climate change is already there. It's not a question of the future, it's a question of today. The impacts are devastating. Floods, hurricanes, drought, hunger linked and famine linked to drought. And so investment in adaptation needs to be boosted, and the COP must play a role on that. And finally, all the commitments, the financial commitments made in Paris that have not yet been respected by developed countries must be respected.
So how can Vietnam join hands with the UN in addressing that issue?
Well, I think Vietnam has a voice that today has an important moral authority, because you simultaneously are developing your country, you are creating conditions for the economy to move forward, but you are doing it with a strong concern of sustainability. And at the same time, you also have the moral authority of a country that is extremely vulnerable to climate change. So you have the authority to tell the others, behave please, because if not, we'll also suffer enormously.
Bustling, vibrant, and busy are the words Secretary General Antonio Guterres used to describe his feelings about Vietnam during his official visit to the country. And when it comes to vibrancy and dynamism, I cannot think of any example better than Spirit of Youth. The Secretary General and I had a chance to sit down with youth representatives from Vietnam and listen to their initiatives of how to contribute to innovations and sustainable development goals of the UN.
4 Vietnamese youths were selected to participate in the dialogue between United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Vietnamese youth. Ngọc Anh is one of the authors of the special reports published by Youth for Climate for 2 consecutive years, 2021 and 2022. At the same time, Ngọc Anh is also a member of the Youth for Climate Learning Hub and the future leader of the policy network Youth for Climate. Lê Thu Trang is currently working at Non Nước Cao Bằng UNESCO Global Geopark. She's vice chair of the Youth Forum promoting Non Nước Cao Bằng Geopark. Meanwhile, Phùng Kim Quang is one of the young people who actively contribute to public health. Upon graduation from Hanoi Medical University, Quang became an officer of the World Health Organization, WHO. Captain Sammy Ngọc, a staff officer of Field Support Division, Vietnam Department of Peacekeeping Operations, is one of the first 10 Vietnamese female officers to be sent on duty at the Level 2 Field Hospital No. 1 at United Nations Peacekeeping Mission in Bentiu, South Sudan.
First of all, may I turn to you and ask you, UN Secretary General, how do you feel right now?
I'm extremely grateful for the very, very warm reception and by the feeling that the youth of Vietnam is able to move this country forward even more successfully than until now. So congratulations to the young people of this country for their dynamism, for their will to innovate and to participate.
Thank you so much. You mentioned about participation and dynamism, and I think dedication is also one important factor, characteristic of youth. And speaking of dedication, I do not find anyone more appropriate than all of the UN peacekeepers sitting here in the audience, as well as our female UN peacekeeper here, Captain Sammy Ngọc. You look amazing in that uniform of UN peacekeeping.
On behalf of the Vietnamese military youth, I'm very honored and proud to be here today. I have deployed to United Nations peacekeeping missions in South Sudan from October 2018 to end of November 2019. And this is also the first contingent that Vietnam has sent to UN PKOs.
So can you tell us a little bit about what activities, professional tasks that you and your team deployed?
Since 2014, we have sent a total of 4 rotations of Vietnam Level 2 Hospital, more than 70 officers to work in different positions and bodies of the United Nations missions in South Sudan, Central African Republic, IBA areas, and also in the UN headquarters. Almost 60% of us are young officers, are members of Vietnam Military Youth Union, the Vietnam Youth Movement in the UN United Nations missions, also have pioneered in many of the CIMIC, civil military coordination activities. For example, we have the art team that making school supplies and children toy from the recycled items. Carpentry teams helping people to for repairing school and also establishing the clean water supply. The mobile medical team to provide medical care and also teach the local on the personal hygiene. And maybe especially the agriculture teams. We help in teaching the local people on the cultivating techniques, on how to grow their own vegetable and how to cook them properly to provide more nutrition. I think that this...
What kind of vegetable did you teach them to cook?
Many kind of vegetable, for example, the morning glories.
Morning glory?
Yes.
Rau muống.
Yeah. This is also reflect one of the long-standing traditions of Vietnam People's Army to building and consolidating the relationship between the people and the army. Our action that go far beyond the call of duties is not only for supporting the life of the local communities, but also has inspired the local youth in master their futures. Our contingent has a chance to go to the protection of civilian camp in Bentiu, South Sudan. And I will never forget the images of a small local girl come to me and she pointed at my blue beret and she told me that I want to be like you. I believe that these kind of CIMIC activities should be replicated in different United Nations missions. And from a youth perspective, I think that is the best way to win the heart and mind of the local communities.
I have to say that the crucial aspect in a peacekeeping operation is the establishment of a relationship of trust between the peacekeepers and the population. The peacekeepers are supposed to keep the peace, And to keep the peace, the most important thing is to have confidence in each other. And so all the work that peacekeepers do in relation to the local communities, to help them overcome the enormous difficulties that they face, is exactly what is needed for an effective peacekeeping operation. Now, what we heard is the best description of this principle. And it shows, probably because Vietnam has a long history, which those that fought for independence and then fought for unity were deeply rooted with the people. So that experience, I think, helps today's Vietnam peacekeepers understand that their role can only be effectively played if they are, to use an old expression, if they are in the population of South Sudan, in the population of Central African Republic or in ABA, like fish in water.
Thank you so much. So now we would move on to the second panelist, and he would bring to the table a different story, but also very interesting.
My name is Phung Kim Quang, and I am working for WHO Vietnam country office.
So Quang, I heard that during COVID time, you worked closely with the Ministry of Health and also WHO to directly involved in the fight against COVID-19. Can you tell us some stories that you remember the most from that time?
I experienced the power of the youth during COVID-19. I was in the room with many of young people who developing that. They are from the government, they are from outside of the government. Many of them are volunteer. This is a very challenging job, but we keep forward because that is what we need to get the job done. We have to have a better response for public health emergency like COVID-19. We need to end TB. So to achieve all of the objectives in the time frame that we agree upon each other, we need the system in place. We need the actor in place. And during my time in WHO, I recognize that both of these are very important. And for both of these to actually work, we need the trust between each other.
After listening to Quang's story, what do you think about the case of Vietnam health system?
You had a massive vaccination campaign. And based on that massive vaccination campaign, you were able to find the adequate equilibrium between the protection of the population against the COVID and the opening of the economy. And this is a very difficult balance that in many countries is not yet found. My light impression is that thanks to a very effective vaccination campaign that went all over the country, you were able to simultaneously protect the population and open the economy, allowing Vietnam's economy to be growing by more than 8% in the present year.
Thank you so much. Beside a pandemic like COVID-19, climate change is also an issue that I know is high on your agenda. And we have a lady here. Can you give us more details about the project that you are working on and the process of creating a report on climate change?
My name is Ngọc Anh. I'm a fresh RMIT Vietnam graduate, and I am part of the Youth for Climate initiative. At the moment, I'm working with 20 youth to finish the second report for Vietnam's Youth for Climate initiative, and also to establish the Youth for Climate Policy Working Group. The 2022 special report will be coming out next week with the Ho Chi Minh Youth Union, with Monterey, and of course with UNDP. A sneak peek of the draft of the second report. I'm very, very proud of it because it was the combined effort of my friends, of my colleagues, and we worked really hard on this. So, Mr. SG, maybe you can give us the honor of receiving this gift from everyone who worked on this report together.
I just came from India, where together with Prime Minister Modi, we launched a program called Lifestyles for the Environment, which means the role of groups like yours is absolutely essential, because you are fighting climate change yourselves with your behavior. I mean, for instance, waste. Waste is terrible. It's an economic loss, but contributes to climate change. And many other areas of behavior, nutrition that is not adequate, all these contributes to climate change. So your role in mobilizing people to behave in a way that is environmentally responsible is very, very important.
Thank you so much. I do have one more thing to share. Youth roadmap for next year. If you look at this, you'll see that most of our activities are for youth capacity building and to empower youth voices. And our year will end after COP28, where we will summarize and work on the next report together.
Thanks to the creativity of the youth, like and her team. So maybe it's a better way to spread the awareness about climate change and solutions to tackle it. I want to ask the UNSG a question about what do you think the role of the young people, especially Vietnamese young people, in tackling climate change, and how do you view the country's efforts in the green transition?
Well, the truth is that young people has been driving global public opinion in a fantastic way. Young people are not only the owners of the future, young people are now also the owners of the present, driving the world in the fight against climate change.
I know that climate change is important, solutions to tackling it is very important, but also the preservation of biodiversity is important, equally important, I think. Today we have Chang from Cao Bằng province, and she's doing all she can to help promote and preserve her Cao Bằng Geopark, one of the 3 UNESCO recognized sites in Vietnam. So, Chang, are you originally from Cao Bằng province?
My name is Chang, and I am 100% Cao Bằng. I was born and raised in Cao Bằng. It's very mountainous. We have a very kind of difficult geography, so it's hard for it to develop the economy, and it's also linked to the problem of education.
So how come your English is so good?
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know. I think because my parents know the value of education, and they don't have chance to go further for the education. They want me to have a good and decent education. So I work really hard on this. I live in Cao Bằng for 18 years, and I just live in Hanoi since I be a DAB student.
Wow, so that's amazing. So now tell us a little bit about activities that you have been doing at the Cao Bằng Geo Park.
In Cao Bằng, I joined the field trip to find out the existing problems of people there, so that we can understand more and then find solution to promote and enhance the livelihood of people in there. I also took part in filming a video for promoting the Cao Bằng Geopark, because we just get recognized for 4 years, and people are not so well aware of what is the geopark and what is that for.
You've come a long way, and thank you. And I think it's a good opportunity for you to raise the voice and maybe speak for your friends and students in Cao Bằng province, and be a role model for them.
I mean, education at the level that we are talking about are still a minority, which means that those of us that have the privilege to have access to education have a duty in relation to those that have not the same access. And the duty is to use what we gained from our education to the service of those that have not the same privilege.
Thank you so much.
With the objectives of impact, creativity, courage, solidarity, and enthusiasm towards sustainable development, Vietnamese youth are making many positive contributions to realizing sustainable development goals. Many young people are willing to go to remote areas to teach volunteer classes to help provide quality education. In addition, concerning climate action, the young generation has implemented numerous projects such as planting trees, collecting trash to protect the environment, In particular, they have organized competitions and collective activities for young people to show their initiative in responding to climate change. While not only contributing to social goals, Vietnamese youth are active too in establishing partnerships. They are also making Vietnam's voice heard on global issues by actively participating in face-to-face and virtual forums and seminars. With the message, Vietnamese young people are the key agents for change and innovation towards the achievements of sustainability, resilience, and leaving no one behind. Vietnamese youth will continue to strive to achieve their goals and add value to the community. The Temple of Literature was the first place His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary-General, paid a visit to on the afternoon of October 22nd. His Excellency spent time learning about this historic site. He was especially interested in the history of the Imperial Academy, Vietnam's first national university.
Tôi rất là xúc động và thực sự là rất là tự hào khi được giới thiệu về các cái giá trị truyền thống của di tích Văn Miếu Quốc Tử Giám còn lưu giữ nơi đây. Đó là được giới thiệu với ngài Tổng thư ký về cái truyền thống tôn sư trọng đạo, tinh thần hiếu học và trọng dụng hiện tại.
In the guest book, His Excellency Antonio Guterres left a note saying, "It is with deep emotion that I came here to visit this remarkable temple and university, a clear symbol of the rich history and cultural heritage of Vietnam." Visiting the Imperial Citadel of Thăng Long, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the UN Secretary-General extended his regards to Vietnam for their efforts in restoring and preserving their historical and cultural values. His comments were especially apt as Vietnam had just celebrated 50 years of membership in the World Heritage Convention and 2 decades of research and excavation of the Imperial Citadel of Thăng Long.
Chúng tôi cũng rất là vui mừng là di sản Hoàng thành Thăng Long là một di sản hết sức quan trọng ở giữa lòng thủ đô, cũng đã được đón Tổng thư ký Liên Quốc đến thăm. Đây là một cái sự kiện hết sức quan trọng đối với chúng tôi và chúng tôi cũng cho rằng đây là cái sự ghi nhận của quốc tế.
The last place His Excellency Antonio Guterres visited was Ngoc Sơn Temple. He was greeted here by Mr. Nguyễn Xuân Phúc, State President of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and Hanoi government leaders. While offering incense in Ngoc Sơn Temple, His Excellency UN Secretary-General received a special gift.
Bây giờ là tôi xin tặng quý ông là chữ Thế giới hòa bình, nhân dân hạnh phúc. Mấy hôm nay tôi đã nghe là ông Tổng thư ký đến thăm Hà Nội và hôm nay rất vinh dự được đón ông đến thăm đền Ngọc Sơn. Tôi lại được dịp tặng chữ Thế giới hòa bình, nhân dân hạnh phúc. Đúng là nguyện vọng của chúng ta và của tất cả mọi người trên thế giới. Mong mọi người rằng nguyện vọng đó sẽ được thực hiện ở trên toàn thế giới. Bắt đầu từ đây cho đến mãi trên niên kỷ này.
Though his time in Vietnam was short, the UN Secretary-General left an impression of a single and friendly world leader. And certainly, the warm welcome of the state and the government and people of Hanoi must have impressed upon him the hospitality of Vietnam and the rich historical and cultural values of Hanoi, a civilized capital and a city for peace.
Vietnam has come a long way, and the journey continues. You once again have the opportunity to be a powerhouse for change. The United Nations is proud to be your partner every step of the way. Tien Len, Kung Tien Len. Onward, we advance together as we just heard in the Vietnam national anthem.